Picture this: a single bolt of silk, delicate as morning mist, begins its journey in the bustling workshops of ancient Chang'an. Over the next 18 months, it will pass through the hands of dozens of merchants, cross scorching deserts where mirages dance on the horizon, traverse mountain passes so high that the air burns your lungs, and navigate political intrigues that could topple empires. By the time this precious fabric reaches the marble halls of Rome, it will have traveled over 4,000 miles, and its value will have increased by more than 1,000%. This is not just the story of silk, but the story of the most ambitious commercial network in human history, the Silk Road. But before we embark on this epic journey through time, if you're fascinated by the grand sweep of ancient history and the incredible stories of human achievement, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring these amazing historical narratives to life. The year is 138 BCE. Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty sits in his palace in Chang'an, modern-day Xi'an, pondering a problem that keeps him awake at night. To the north and west, the Xiongnu, a confederation of nomadic tribes, pose an existential threat to his empire. Their mounted archers strike like lightning and vanish like ghosts, making conventional warfare nearly impossible. Wu needs allies, and he's heard rumors of a people called the Yuezhi, who were driven westward by these same Xiongnu decades earlier. Perhaps they too harbor dreams of revenge. Wu calls for Zhang Qian, a court official known for his intelligence and courage. The mission he assigns seems almost suicidal: travel west through Xiongnu territory, find the Yuezhi, and forge an alliance. Zhang Qian accepts without hesitation, understanding that success could change the fate of China, while failure would likely mean death in some desolate corner of the world. What Zhang Qian couldn't have known as he set out with his small caravan was that his journey would accidentally create something far more significant than any military alliance. He was about to open the arteries through which the lifeblood of Eurasian civilization would flow for the next 1,500 years. Zhang Qian's expedition was an unmitigated disaster from a military perspective. Almost immediately after leaving Chinese territory, his party was captured by the Xiongnu. For 10 years, Zhang Qian lived as a prisoner, though he was treated well and even given a wife and children. The Xiongnu leader, the Chanyu, seemed to find the Chinese officials' determination amusing rather than threatening. But Zhang Qian never abandoned his mission. In 129 BCE, seeing his chance during a moment of reduced vigilance, he escaped with a few loyal companions and continued westward. What Zhang Qian found in the lands beyond Chinese control transformed his understanding of the world. In the Fergana Valley, in what is now Uzbekistan, he encountered the Dayuan people, who possessed horses unlike any seen in China. These weren't the sturdy ponies of the steppes, but magnificent creatures that seemed to sweat blood, though we now know this was likely due to parasites under their skin. The Chinese, who had a deep spiritual connection to horses, were mesmerized by these heavenly horses, and would later launch military campaigns specifically to acquire them. In Bactria, in northern Afghanistan, Zhang Qian found the remnants of a Hellenistic kingdom, where Greek culture still flourished centuries after Alexander the Great's conquests. Here, East truly met West for the first time in recorded history. Buddhist monks from India debated philosophy with Greek scholars, who maintained libraries filled with works by Aristotle and Plato. The fusion of cultures was evident everywhere. Coins bore the images of Greek gods rendered in Indian artistic styles, while Buddhist stupas incorporated Greek architectural elements. But most importantly for the future of world trade, Zhang Qian discovered that the regions he visited were already connected by an intricate network of trade routes. Caravans regularly carried goods between the Mediterranean world and India, between Central Asia and Persia, between the oasis cities of the Tarim Basin and the great commercial centers of the Middle East. What was missing was a reliable connection to China, the source of the world's most coveted luxury good. Silk. When Zhang Qian finally returned to Chang'an in 126 BCE, after 13 years of absence and adventure, he brought more than just intelligence about potential military allies. He carried samples of goods that would revolutionize Chinese understanding of the world's possibilities. Glass from the Roman Empire that was clearer than anything Chinese artisans could produce, spices from India that could preserve food and delight the palate, precious stones that seemed to capture starlight, and most intriguingly, reports of a mysterious substance called gold-spun thread that the Western peoples valued as highly as the Chinese valued silk. The emperor was fascinated, but the immediate priorities were military. Zhang Qian was sent on a second mission in 119 BCE, this time to establish diplomatic relations with various Central Asian kingdoms. This journey was far more successful in political terms, establishing Chinese influence in the Tarim Basin and opening formal diplomatic channels with the kingdoms of Central Asia. But the most lasting impact was economic. Chinese merchants, following in the wake of official expeditions, began to establish regular trade relationships with their Western counterparts. The mechanics of Silk Road trade were far more complex and sophisticated than most people imagine. This wasn't a single route with merchants traveling from China to Rome, but rather a network of interconnected trade routes where goods passed through many hands before reaching their final destinations. A piece of silk leaving Chang'an might be sold to a Sogdian merchant in Kashgar, who would carry it to Samarkand, where it would be purchased by a Persian trader, who would transport it to Ctesiphon, where it would be bought by a Syrian merchant, who would finally carry it to Antioch or even Rome. Each stage of this journey added value to the goods, but also served a crucial function in making the trade economically viable. No single merchant needed to finance or organize a journey of thousands of miles through hostile territory. Instead, each trader specialized in a particular segment of the route, developing expertise in local conditions, languages, and customs. This system was remarkably resilient. If war or natural disaster disrupted one section of the route, goods could flow through alternative pathways. The Sogdians deserve special recognition as the masters of Silk Road commerce. Based in the fertile valleys of what is now Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, with their capital at Samarkand, the Sogdians were perhaps history's most successful long-distance traders. They established communities throughout Central Asia and China, learning local languages and adapting to local customs while maintaining their own distinct identity. Sogdian became the lingua franca of Silk Road trade, spoken from the Mediterranean to the Pacific. What made the Sogdians so successful was their development of sophisticated commercial practices that wouldn't look out of place in a modern business school. They created standardized weights and measures, developed credit systems that allowed merchants to deposit money in one city and withdraw it in another, and established commercial law that governed disputes between traders from different cultures. They even developed a form of insurance where multiple merchants would share the risks of a caravan, ensuring that no single trader would be ruined by the loss of a shipment. The routes themselves were marvels of logistics and endurance. The northern route led from Chang'an west through the Hexi Corridor, a narrow strip of habitable land between the Gobi Desert and the Tibetan Plateau. This corridor was defended by a series of Chinese military outposts and garrison towns, the westernmost being Dunhuang, which became one of the most important stops on the entire Silk Road. From Dunhuang, caravans faced a crucial decision: take the northern route around the Taklamakan Desert through cities like Turpan and Urumqi, or brave the southern route through Khotan and Yarkand. The Taklamakan Desert was known to the Chinese as the Sea of Death, and for good reason. This vast expanse of shifting sand dunes could swallow entire caravans without a trace. The desert was so dry that wooden artifacts buried in its sands would remain perfectly preserved for over 1,000 years. Yet merchants regularly crossed it, following ancient riverbeds and navigating by the stars because the profits justified the enormous risks. The oasis cities that dotted these routes were like pearls on a string, each one a miracle of human adaptation to hostile environments. Kashgar, at the western edge of the Tarim Basin, was where the northern and southern routes reunited. Here, merchants could resupply, rest, and most importantly, exchange information about conditions ahead. The city's Grand Bazaar was a Tower of Babel where Chinese, Persian, Arabic, Sogdian, and dozens of other languages mixed in a constant din of commerce. From Kashgar, the main route led west through the Pamirs, the roof of the world, where the altitude was so extreme that some travelers suffered from what we now recognize as altitude sickness. The Wakhan Corridor, a narrow strip of land between towering peaks, was particularly treacherous. Avalanches could bury an entire caravan in minutes, and the cold was so intense that metal would become brittle and snap. Yet caravans continued to make this journey because on the other side lay the riches of Central Asia and beyond. Samarkand was perhaps the greatest of all Silk Road cities, a place where the wealth of continents converged. The city's location at the crossroads of routes from China, India, Persia, and Russia made it the natural center of Eurasian trade. Contemporary accounts describe markets that seemed to contain the produce of the entire world: Chinese silk and porcelain, Indian spices and precious stones, Persian carpets and metalwork, Russian furs and amber from the Baltic, African ivory and gold. The level of cultural exchange in Samarkand was extraordinary. Chinese artists learned Persian techniques for working with lapis lazuli, while Persian craftsmen mastered Chinese methods for producing porcelain. Indian mathematicians taught Arabic numerals to Chinese scholars, while Chinese inventors shared the secrets of papermaking with their Western colleagues. The city's workshops produced goods that combined techniques and aesthetic elements from across Eurasia, creating truly cosmopolitan art that reflected the international nature of Silk Road culture. But the Silk Road wasn't just about luxury goods for the wealthy. Archaeological evidence reveals that everyday items also traveled these routes in surprising quantities. Chinese cast iron farming tools have been found in Central Asian settlements, while Persian glass vessels appear in Chinese archaeological sites. Foodstuffs were equally important. Chinese recipes for noodles influenced Central Asian cuisine, while Central Asian techniques for preserving meat were adopted by Chinese communities along the frontier. The religious dimension of Silk Road exchange was perhaps even more significant than the commercial aspects. Buddhism, which originated in India in the 5th century BCE, spread eastward along these trade routes to become the dominant religion of East Asia. Buddhist monks were among the most frequent travelers on the Silk Road, carrying not just religious texts, but also scientific and philosophical knowledge. The famous Chinese pilgrim Xuanzang, who traveled to India in the 7th century CE to obtain authentic Buddhist scriptures, followed Silk Road routes and left detailed accounts of the cities and peoples he encountered. Christianity also spread along these routes, reaching China by the 7th century CE. The Nestorian stele, erected in Chang'an in 781 CE, commemorates the arrival of Christian missionaries and describes the favorable reception they received from the Chinese emperor. Manichaeism, Zoroastrianism, and later Islam all followed similar patterns, spreading not through conquest, but through the peaceful interactions of merchants and travelers. The technological transfer along the Silk Road was equally revolutionary. Paper, invented in China during the Han Dynasty, gradually spread westward, reaching the Islamic world by the 8th century and Europe by the 12th century. This single innovation transformed education, administration, and culture across Eurasia. Chinese techniques for printing, both woodblock and later movable type, followed similar patterns of diffusion. Gunpowder, another Chinese invention, traveled westward along these routes and fundamentally changed the nature of warfare in the Islamic world and Europe. The irony that gunpowder weapons would later be used by European powers to dominate Asian trade routes would not become apparent for several more centuries. Mathematical and astronomical knowledge flowed in both directions. Chinese astronomers learned of Ptolemaic astronomy through Silk Road contacts, while Islamic mathematicians gained access to Chinese innovations in algebra and trigonometry. The exchange of medical knowledge was particularly valuable. Chinese acupuncture techniques reached the Middle East, while Islamic medical texts, many of which preserved Greek knowledge, became available in China. The economic impact of the Silk Road on the societies it connected cannot be overstated. In China, the demand for silk drove technological innovations in sericulture and weaving that kept Chinese products competitive in international markets for over a millennium. The profits from silk trade funded Chinese military expansion and cultural flowering during dynasties from the Han through the Tang. In Central Asia, Silk Road trade created unprecedented wealth and cultural sophistication. Cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Merv became centers of learning that rivaled Baghdad, Cordoba, and Constantinople. The wealth generated by trade allowed local rulers to patronize scholars, artists, and architects, creating a golden age of Central Asian civilization that lasted from roughly the 8th through the 12th centuries CE. The Roman Empire's relationship with Silk Road trade was more complex. Romans had an insatiable appetite for Chinese silk, Indian spices, and other Eastern luxuries, but they produced relatively little that Eastern markets wanted in return. This led to a massive outflow of gold and silver from the Roman Empire to pay for imports, a drain that some historians argue contributed to the empire's eventual economic difficulties. The Roman author Pliny the Elder complained that the empire was being bled dry by its appetite for luxuries from the East. Yet the Silk Road also brought significant benefits to the Roman world. Chinese innovations in metallurgy improved Roman weapons and tools. Indian mathematical concepts, including the concept of zero, revolutionized Roman engineering and architecture. Spices from India and Southeast Asia not only made Roman food more flavorful, but also helped preserve it, improving nutrition and reducing food waste. The political implications of Silk Road trade were equally significant. Controlling key segments of the routes became a major objective of empires and kingdoms throughout Eurasia. The Chinese Han dynasty's expansion into Central Asia was largely motivated by the desire to secure trade routes. The Persian Sassanid Empire's conflicts with Byzantium often centered on control of trade routes through the Caucasus and Mesopotamia. The rise of the Abbasid Caliphate in the 8th century CE marked a new phase in Silk Road history. Under Abbasid rule, Islamic civilization reached its golden age, and Muslim merchants became increasingly important in Silk Road trade. Islamic commercial law, which was more sophisticated than most existing legal systems, gradually became the standard for international trade. Islamic banking innovations, including the use of checks and letters of credit, made long-distance commerce more efficient and secure. Baghdad, the Abbasid capital, became a major center of Silk Road trade, rivaling Samarkand in its wealth and cosmopolitan character. The city's House of Wisdom became a center for translating and preserving classical knowledge from Greece, Persia, India, and China. This scholarly activity was funded largely by the profits of long-distance trade, demonstrating the connection between commercial prosperity and intellectual achievement. The Mongol conquests of the 13th century initially disrupted Silk Road trade, but ultimately led to its greatest flowering. Under Mongol rule, a single political authority controlled most of the Eurasian landmass from Korea to Poland. This Pax Mongolica provided unprecedented security for merchants traveling between East and West. Mongol authorities actively promoted trade, providing protection for caravans and standardizing weights, measures, and currencies across their vast empire. The Mongol period saw the emergence of the first truly global merchants. Marco Polo's family, the Polos of Venice, were among many European traders who established permanent bases in China during this period. The wealth that flowed into Europe from this trade helped finance the Renaissance and the age of exploration that followed. Chinese inventions like the compass and gunpowder, which reached Europe during this period, would later enable European maritime expansion. But perhaps most importantly, the Mongol period saw the development of what might be called the first global economy. Prices for certain commodities began to correlate across vast distances. A shortage of silver in China could drive up prices in Samarkand within months. A bumper crop of spices in India could affect prices in Venice by the following year. For the first time in human history, economic events in one part of the world could have immediate consequences thousands of miles away. The daily life of Silk Road merchants was a mixture of incredible luxury and extreme hardship. A successful merchant might own palatial homes in multiple cities, with wives and families spread across continents. The most successful Sogdian merchants maintained households in Chang'an, Samarkand, and Ctesiphon simultaneously, moving between them as business required. Their children often grew up multilingual and multicultural, equally at home in Chinese tea ceremonies and Persian poetry recitations. Yet the same merchants faced constant dangers on the road. Bandits were a perpetual threat. Organized groups of robbers would sometimes follow caravans for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Natural disasters could be even more devastating. Sandstorms in the Taklamakan desert could last for days, forcing caravans to shelter with limited food and water. Flash floods could wash away carefully planned routes, forcing detours that could add weeks to a journey. Disease was perhaps the greatest killer of Silk Road travelers. The same routes that carried goods and ideas also carried pathogens. The Black Death, which devastated Europe in the 14th century, likely spread along Silk Road routes from its origins in Central Asia. Malaria, dysentery, and other diseases killed more merchants than all the bandits and natural disasters combined. The logistics of organizing a major caravan were staggeringly complex. A typical caravan might include several hundred camels, each capable of carrying about 400 pounds of goods. But camels were expensive and required expert care. Camel drivers were skilled professionals who could read the animal's behavior to predict weather changes and find water in seemingly barren landscapes. A good camel driver was worth his weight in silk. Beyond camels and drivers, caravans needed guards, cooks, guides, interpreters, and religious advisors. Large caravans were essentially mobile cities, complete with their own governments and laws. The caravan leader, or caravan bashi, wielded almost absolute authority during the journey, making life and death decisions about routes, rest stops, and responses to threats. The goods traded along the Silk Road evolved significantly over the centuries. While silk remained important throughout the period, other products rose and fell in significance based on changing tastes, technologies, and political circumstances. During certain periods, Chinese porcelain was more valuable than silk in Western markets. The Chinese developed techniques for creating porcelain so fine it was almost translucent, and the secrets of its production were closely guarded for centuries. Spices from India and Southeast Asia were consistently among the most valuable Silk Road commodities. Black pepper, cinnamon, cardamom, and cloves were literally worth their weight in gold in European markets. The European appetite for spices wasn't just about flavor. In an age before refrigeration, spices were essential for preserving meat and masking the taste of food that was beginning to spoil. Precious stones and metals flowed in all directions along the roads. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan was prized by artists from China to Europe for creating the brilliant blue pigments used in religious artwork. Jade from Central Asia was treasured in China for both its beauty and its supposed magical properties. Pearls from the Persian Gulf adorned wealthy women from Cordoba to Kyoto. The horse trade deserves special mention because it demonstrated how Silk Road commerce could reshape military and political power. The Chinese, despite their advanced civilization, lacked good cavalry horses. The small, sturdy ponies of the Mongolian steppes were excellent for herding and light skirmishing, but they couldn't match the speed and power of the blood-sweating horses of Fergana. Chinese demand for these horses was so intense that emperors were willing to launch costly military campaigns specifically to secure access to them. This demand for horses created a complex three-way trade relationship. Chinese silk and other manufactured goods flowed west to Central Asia, where they were exchanged for horses and other pastoral products, which then flowed back to China. But Central Asian horse breeders also needed agricultural products and manufactured goods, which they obtained by trading horses to sedentary communities. This created a stable economic relationship that lasted for centuries. The technological innovations driven by Silk Road trade were remarkable. Chinese silk production, which began as a closely guarded secret, gradually spread westward despite Chinese efforts to maintain their monopoly. By the 6th century CE, Byzantium had established its own silk industry, allegedly using silkworm eggs smuggled out of China by Nestorian monks. This technological transfer broke the Chinese monopoly and fundamentally altered the economics of Silk Road trade. Similarly, the Chinese monopoly on porcelain production was eventually broken when Islamic potters developed their own techniques for creating fine ceramics. These technological transfers demonstrate how difficult it was to maintain trade advantages based solely on production secrets. The constant movement of people along Silk Road routes ensured that technological knowledge would eventually spread, regardless of official policies. The role of women in Silk Road commerce is often overlooked, but was more significant than many assume. While most long-distance merchants were men, women played crucial roles in financing trade ventures and managing commercial enterprises. In some Central Asian societies, women could own property independently and enter into commercial contracts. Wealthy merchant families often entrusted their wives with managing local business operations, while the men traveled with caravans. Some women became merchants themselves. Chinese historical records mention female merchants who specialized in certain types of goods, particularly textiles and luxury items marketed to other women. In the Buddhist kingdoms of Central Asia, female monastics sometimes engaged in trade to fund their religious communities, becoming expert in evaluating and trading precious stones and fine fabrics. The Silk Road also facilitated one of history's most remarkable exchanges of cultural practices related to food and cooking. Chinese noodle-making techniques influenced the development of pasta in Italy, though the exact mechanisms of this transfer remain debated among food historians. Central Asian techniques for preserving meat through drying and fermentation spread both east and west, influencing Chinese and European cuisine. Spice trading was particularly important in shaping global food culture. European demand for Asian spices didn't just change European cooking, it created economic incentives that would eventually drive the age of maritime exploration. The profits available from spice trading were so enormous that European merchants were willing to undertake incredibly dangerous sea voyages to find alternative routes to Asian markets. Tea culture provides another fascinating example of Silk Road cultural exchange. While tea originated in China, its consumption spread westward along trade routes, with each culture adapting it to local tastes and customs. The Persian and Central Asian preference for heavily sweetened tea, often served with milk, influenced the development of chai culture in India, which in turn influenced British tea customs when the British established colonial rule in India. The environmental impact of Silk Road trade was significant and long-lasting. The constant movement of caravans across fragile desert and mountain ecosystems caused considerable damage. Overgrazing by pack animals degraded grasslands, while the demand for wood for cooking and construction led to deforestation around oasis cities. Some historians argue that intensive Silk Road traffic contributed to the desertification of parts of Central Asia. However, the Silk Road also facilitated the spread of new crops and agricultural techniques that had positive environmental impacts. Chinese innovations in irrigation, including the Khares underground irrigation systems still used in western China, spread westward and enabled agriculture in previously barren areas. New crops moved along the routes in both directions. Grapes and alfalfa reached China from the west, while soybeans and tea spread westward from China. The artistic exchange along the Silk Road created some of history's most remarkable cultural syntheses. The Gandhara school of Buddhist art, which flourished in what is now Pakistan and Afghanistan, combined Greek sculptural techniques with Indian religious themes and Central Asian decorative elements. These artistic innovations then influenced Buddhist art throughout East Asia, creating a truly international artistic language. Chinese painters adopted Persian techniques for depicting horses and other animals, while Persian miniaturists incorporated Chinese landscape elements into their work. Islamic calligraphy influenced Chinese and Central Asian artistic traditions, while Chinese paper-making techniques enabled the flourishing of Islamic book arts. The cross-pollination of artistic traditions created a shared visual vocabulary that could be understood across cultural boundaries. Music and literature also flowed along these routes. Chinese court music incorporated Central Asian instruments and melodies, while Persian poetry influenced Chinese literary forms. The epic tradition of Central Asia, with its tales of heroic journeys and cross-cultural romance, drew inspiration from the real experiences of Silk Road travelers. Many of these epic poems, like the Persian Shahnameh, include detailed descriptions of exotic goods and distant lands that reflect actual Silk Road trading relationships. The legal systems that governed Silk Road trade were remarkably sophisticated. Since merchants from different cultures needed to interact regularly, standardized commercial practices gradually emerged. Islamic commercial law became particularly influential because it provided detailed guidance for long-distance trade relationships and had provisions for dealing with merchants from other religious traditions. The concept of the trade guild, which became important in European commercial development, was influenced by Central Asian models encountered through Silk Road contacts. Similarly, Chinese commercial practices, including standardized weights and measures and government quality controls, influenced trading practices throughout Central Asia and beyond. Banking and credit systems that developed to support Silk Road trade were among the most advanced in the pre-modern world. The Hawala system, still used in parts of Asia and the Middle East today, allowed merchants to deposit money in one city and withdraw equivalent value in another without physically transporting coins or precious metals. This system depended entirely on trust and reputation, demonstrating the sophisticated social networks that supported Silk Road commerce. The decline of the Silk Road was a gradual process that took place over several centuries. Multiple factors contributed to this decline, but the most significant was the development of maritime trade routes that could transport larger quantities of goods more cheaply and safely than overland caravans. The Portuguese discovery of a sea route to India in 1498 marked the beginning of the end for the traditional Silk Road. Portuguese, and later Dutch and English, maritime traders could transport goods from Asia to Europe in months rather than years, and their ships could carry far more cargo than any caravan. More importantly, maritime routes avoided the numerous tolls, taxes and tribute payments that land-based merchants faced as they passed through multiple political jurisdictions. The rise of the Ottoman Empire also contributed to the Silk Road's decline. While the Ottomans were skilled administrators and traders, their conflicts with European powers made traditional overland routes politically unstable. European merchants began to see maritime routes not just as economically superior, but as politically necessary to avoid Ottoman control. The political fragmentation of Central Asia following the decline of Mongol power made overland trading increasingly difficult. Without a single authority providing security across the entire route, merchants faced higher costs for protection and insurance. Banditry increased as central authority weakened, making caravan trading more dangerous and less profitable. Climate change also played a role in the Silk Road's decline. The Little Ice Age, which began in the 14th century, made travel through high mountain passes more difficult and unpredictable. Some previously reliable routes became impassable during certain seasons, forcing merchants to take longer, more expensive detours. Yet the Silk Road's legacy extends far beyond its role in commercial history. The cultural exchanges it facilitated laid the groundwork for what we now recognize as world civilization. The scientific revolution in Europe drew heavily on Islamic and Chinese knowledge that had been transmitted along Silk Road routes. The Renaissance was financed partly by wealth accumulated through Eastern trade and inspired by artistic traditions that had developed through Silk Road cultural exchange. Perhaps most importantly, the Silk Road demonstrated that different cultures could interact peacefully and profitably despite vast differences in language, religion, and customs. The merchants who traveled these routes developed practical solutions to problems of cross-cultural communication and cooperation that remain relevant today. Their experience shows that trade and cultural exchange can be powerful forces for peace and understanding between different civilizations. The archaeological rediscovery of the Silk Road began in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when European explorers like Aurel Stein, Paul Pelliot, and Sven Hedin began systematically exploring the ruins of Silk Road cities. Their discoveries revolutionized understanding of Central Asian history and revealed the sophisticated level of civilization that had existed in regions that had become desolate and forgotten. The Mogao caves near Dunhuang, discovered by these early explorers, contained thousands of Buddhist manuscripts and artworks that had been sealed in a cave for over 1,000 years. These materials provided unprecedented insight into the religious and cultural life of Silk Road communities. Similarly, the preservation of textiles, documents, and everyday objects in the dry climate of Central Asian deserts gave historians detailed information about the daily lives of Silk Road merchants and travelers. Modern archaeological techniques have continued to reveal new information about Silk Road trade. Isotope analysis of human remains can determine where individuals were born and what they ate, revealing patterns of migration and diet that illuminate how Silk Road communities lived. DNA analysis has traced the spread of crops and domestic animals along these routes, while linguistic analysis has revealed how languages influenced each other through Silk Road contacts. The study of ancient climate data has also enhanced understanding of Silk Road history. Tree ring analysis and ice core samples have revealed how climate changes affected the viability of different routes and influenced the rise and decline of various trading centers. This research has shown that periods of favorable climate often corresponded with the flourishing of Silk Road trade, while harsh conditions could force the abandonment of entire regions. Today, China's Belt and Road Initiative explicitly draws inspiration from the ancient Silk Road, attempting to recreate the commercial and cultural connections that once linked Asia, Europe, and Africa. This modern version includes both overland routes through Central Asia and maritime routes through the Indian Ocean, reflecting the evolution of global trade since the medieval period. The modern initiative faces many of the same challenges that confronted ancient Silk Road merchants: political instability in key regions, cultural and linguistic barriers, and the need to build trust between diverse trading partners. However, modern technology and international law provide tools for addressing these challenges that were unavailable to ancient merchants. The relevance of Silk Road history extends beyond economics to questions of cultural identity and international relations. In an era of increasing globalization, the Silk Road provides a historical model for how different civilizations can interact while maintaining their distinct identities. The cosmopolitan cities of the ancient Silk Road were multicultural in ways that anticipated modern global cities, and their experience offers lessons for managing cultural diversity in contemporary societies. The environmental challenges faced by ancient Silk Road communities also resonate with contemporary concerns. The overuse of natural resources that contributed to the decline of some Central Asian civilizations offers cautionary lessons about sustainable development. However, the successful adaptation of other communities to harsh environmental conditions provides examples of resilience and innovation that remain relevant today. The Silk Road's legacy is perhaps most evident in the cuisine, art, and cultural practices of the regions it connected. The international character of modern Asian cuisine reflects centuries of exchange along these routes. The architectural traditions of Central Asia, with their synthesis of Chinese, Persian, and Islamic elements, continue to influence contemporary design. The religious and philosophical traditions of Asia all bear the marks of Silk Road exchanges. In the realm of technology, the Silk Road's role in spreading innovations like paper, printing, and gunpowder fundamentally shaped world history. These technologies, developed in China and transmitted westward along Silk Road routes, enabled the scientific revolution and the age of exploration that followed. In a very real sense, the modern world economy is built on foundations laid by Silk Road merchants and travelers. The human stories embedded in Silk Road history continue to inspire contemporary writers, artists, and filmmakers. The tales of merchants who crossed continents in search of profit and adventure, of scholars who traveled thousands of miles to obtain sacred texts, of artisans who created beautiful objects, incorporating influences from across the known world, speak to universal human desires for discovery, understanding, and connection. As we face contemporary challenges of international cooperation, cultural understanding, and economic development, the Silk Road offers both inspiration and practical lessons. The merchants and travelers who created this remarkable network of exchange showed that barriers of language, religion, and culture could be overcome through patience, respect, and mutual benefit. Their legacy reminds us that human civilization has always been global in scope, connected by bonds of trade, culture, and shared curiosity about the world beyond our immediate experience. The Silk Road was never just about silk, just as it was never really a single road. It was a complex network of relationships that connected the civilizations of Eurasia for over 15 centuries, facilitating exchanges that shaped art, science, technology, religion, and culture across 3 continents. Its influence can be traced in everything from the spices in our kitchens to the mathematical concepts we use, from the artistic traditions we admire to the religious and philosophical ideas that guide our lives. The human cost of maintaining the Silk Road networks was staggering, yet rarely discussed in the grand narratives of commercial triumph. For every successful merchant who retired wealthy after decades of trading, dozens died along the routes from disease, exposure, or violence. The graveyards that dotted oasis cities tell stories of young men who left their homes in China, Persia, or Central Asia, dreaming of fortune, only to perish thousands of miles from their families. These forgotten graves, marked with inscriptions in languages that are now extinct, represent the true price of the interconnected world that the Silk Road created. Consider the fate of Li Mingshan, a merchant from Chang'an whose story survives in fragmentary documents found in the Dunhuang caves. In 847 CE, Li borrowed heavily to finance a caravan carrying silk and porcelain to Samarkand. His letters home, written during the journey, reveal the gradual erosion of his optimism as one disaster after another befell his expedition. First, unseasonable storms in the Taklamakan desert forced a month-long delay that consumed most of his food supplies. Then, bandits attacked his caravan near Kashgar, making off with nearly half his goods. By the time he reached Samarkand, Li's financial situation was desperate. His final letter, dictated to a scribe because Li had injured his writing hand in the bandit attack, reveals a man broken by the realities of long-distance trade. He had sold his remaining goods at a loss just to pay his debts, and lacked even the funds to return to China. The letter ends with a plea to his family to remember him in their prayers, as he planned to join a westbound caravan as a common laborer, hoping to work his way toward a new life in Persia. No further records of Li Mingshan exist. Like thousands of others, he disappeared into the vast anonymity of the Silk Road. Yet for every tragic story like Li's, there were tales of extraordinary success and adventure. The career of Mahmud al-Kashgari illustrates the possibilities that the Silk Road offered to those with intelligence, courage, and luck. Born in Kashgar around 1005 CE, Mahmud grew up speaking Turkish, Persian, Arabic, and Chinese, linguistic skills that would prove invaluable in his career as a merchant and scholar. His family had been involved in Silk Road trade for generations, and young Mahmud learned the business by accompanying caravans as a translator and cultural guide. What set Mahmud apart was his fascination with the diversity of peoples and cultures he encountered. While other merchants focused solely on profit margins and market conditions, Mahmud carefully documented the languages, customs, and stories of the communities he visited. His masterwork, the Compendium of the Turkic Dialects, completed in 1072 CE, was far more than a linguistic study. It was an ethnographic survey of the entire Central Asian world, filled with details about trade practices, cultural exchanges, and the daily lives of Silk Road communities. Mahmud's work reveals aspects of Silk Road life that are invisible in official histories. He describes the complex marriage customs that had evolved in multicultural trading cities, where families might celebrate weddings according to Chinese, Persian, and Islamic traditions simultaneously. He documents the pidgin languages that developed at major trading centers, allowing merchants from different cultures to communicate effectively despite having no common native language. Most fascinatingly, he records the emergence of what we might call Silk Road folk tales, stories that combined elements from Chinese mythology, Persian epic literature, Islamic religious narratives, and local Central Asian oral traditions. The role of storytelling in Silk Road culture cannot be overstated. In an age before mass media, traveling merchants were often the primary source of news and entertainment for the communities they visited. A skilled storyteller could earn his keep simply by relating tales of distant lands and exotic peoples. Over time, these stories evolved into elaborate narrative cycles that were known throughout the Silk Road world. The tale of the merchant prince of Kashgar, for example, was told with local variations from Venice to Beijing, adapting to local customs and values while maintaining its core theme of adventure and ultimate triumph through cleverness and perseverance. These stories served important social functions beyond entertainment. They provided moral instruction about proper behavior in cross-cultural situations, practical advice about dealing with foreign customs and languages, and psychological comfort for merchants facing the loneliness and danger of long-distance travel. The stories also helped create a shared identity among Silk Road communities, despite their diverse ethnic and religious backgrounds. The seasonal rhythms of Silk Road trade created their own cultural patterns that deeply influenced the societies along the routes. The optimal traveling season was relatively short, roughly from April to October in most regions, dictated by weather conditions in the high mountain passes. This meant that trading cities experienced dramatic population swings throughout the year. During the trading season, cities like Samarkand and Kashgar might triple in population as merchants, guides, guards, and other travelers converged for the brief window of favorable conditions. This seasonal pattern created unique social dynamics. Permanent residents of trading cities often structured their entire economic and social lives around the arrival and departure of caravans. Craftspeople would work throughout the winter, producing goods for the spring trading season. Farmers would time their harvests to coincide with caravan arrivals, when demand for fresh food was highest and prices peaked. Even marriage customs adapted to these patterns, with many weddings scheduled for the end of the trading season when successful merchants returned home with their profits. The winter months, when long-distance travel was impossible, were periods of intense local activity. This was when merchants updated their accounts, planned for the following season, and engaged in the complex negotiations necessary to organize major caravans. It was also the season for cultural activities, the composition of poetry, the creation of artworks, and the scholarly debates that made Silk Road cities centers of learning as well as commerce. The educational systems that developed in major Silk Road cities were uniquely international in character. The madrasas of Samarkand and Bukhara, for example, attracted students from across the Islamic world and beyond. Chinese Confucian scholars studied Islamic philosophy alongside Persian students learning Chinese poetry. Buddhist monasteries in Central Asia served similar functions, bringing together monks and lay scholars from India, China, Tibet, and Central Asia itself. These educational institutions were crucial in training the next generation of Silk Road merchants and administrators. A typical curriculum might include multiple languages, mathematics and accounting, geography and navigation, Islamic or Buddhist law, and practical subjects like animal husbandry and caravan organization. Students also learned the subtle arts of cross-cultural negotiation, how to show respect for different religious customs, how to navigate complex systems of gift-giving and reciprocal obligation, and how to build the personal relationships that were essential for successful long-distance trade. The medical knowledge that accumulated in Silk Road cities was remarkably advanced, driven by the practical necessity of treating travelers who had been exposed to diseases from across Eurasia. The hospitals of Baghdad and Samarkand maintained detailed records of treatments for conditions that were rarely encountered in more isolated communities. These medical centers became repositories of pharmaceutical knowledge from across the known world, combining Chinese herbal medicine, Indian Ayurvedic practices, Persian medical theory, and Greek anatomical knowledge. One of the most significant medical developments was the evolution of quarantine practices. Long before European cities implemented systematic quarantine procedures during plague outbreaks, Silk Road communities had developed sophisticated methods for controlling the spread of epidemic diseases. Caravans arriving from regions known to be affected by disease were required to camp outside city walls for prescribed periods, during which local medical practitioners would monitor the health of travelers and their animals. The veterinary knowledge developed for treating caravan animals was equally advanced. The economic success of long-distance trade depended entirely on maintaining the health of camels, horses, and other pack animals during arduous journeys. Silk Road veterinarians developed specialized treatments for altitude sickness in animals, techniques for treating injuries caused by harsh terrain, and methods for maintaining animal health during extended periods of limited water and fodder. The environmental knowledge accumulated by Silk Road travelers was encyclopedic in scope. Successful merchants needed to understand weather patterns across vast regions, the seasonal availability of water and grazing land, the behavior of desert and mountain ecosystems, and the agricultural cycles of dozens of different regions. This knowledge was typically passed down through families and trading associations, creating sophisticated informal networks of environmental intelligence. The impact of this environmental knowledge extended far beyond commerce. Chinese agricultural techniques, refined through centuries of intensive farming, spread westward along the Silk Road and revolutionized agriculture in Central Asia and the Middle East. The three-field crop rotation system, Chinese innovations in irrigation and water management, and new varieties of crops developed through selective breeding all contributed to increased agricultural productivity throughout the Silk Road world. Similarly, Central Asian and Middle Eastern innovations in animal husbandry spread eastward to China. New breeds of sheep and goats, techniques for managing nomadic herds, and methods for processing animal products like leather and felt all enhanced Chinese pastoral agriculture. The famous Fergana horses that so captivated Chinese emperors were just the most visible example of the westward flow of animal husbandry innovations. The metallurgical knowledge exchanged along the Silk Road had profound military and economic implications. Chinese innovations in iron and steel production gradually spread westward, while Middle Eastern techniques for working with precious metals influenced Chinese jewelry and decorative arts. The famous Damascus steel, renowned throughout the medieval world for its quality, was produced using techniques that combined Central Asian iron-working methods with steel-making innovations that may have originated in India or China. The production of Damascus steel illustrates the complex chains of technological transfer that characterized Silk Road exchange. The raw materials, particular types of iron ore and specific carbon-rich additives, came from mines in Central Asia. The forging techniques were developed by smiths in Damascus, who had learned their craft from Persian masters. The quenching and tempering methods that gave Damascus steel its distinctive properties were refined through centuries of experimentation by craftsmen who had access to metallurgical knowledge from across Eurasia. The Silk Road's influence on the development of mathematics and astronomy cannot be overstated. The practical needs of long-distance merchants, calculating compound interest, converting between different currency systems, determining precise dates for religious observances, and navigating by celestial observations, drove innovations in mathematical and astronomical knowledge. The famous Islamic mathematician Al-Khwarizmi, whose work laid the foundations for algebra, was directly influenced by the practical mathematical problems posed by Silk Road commerce. Similarly, the development of advanced astronomical instruments like the astrolabe was driven partly by the navigational needs of Silk Road travelers. These instruments, which combined Greek mathematical theory with Islamic craftsmanship and Chinese observational techniques, represented the kind of technological synthesis that characterized Silk Road innovation. An astrolabe maker in medieval Isfahan might use mathematical principles developed in ancient Greece. Manufacturing techniques learned from Chinese craftsmen, and astronomical data collected by Persian observers, creating an instrument that would be used by Arab navigators, Jewish merchants, and Christian pilgrims alike. The linguistic legacy of the Silk Road is visible today in the vocabulary of languages across Eurasia. Words for luxury goods, commercial practices, and cultural concepts traveled along the trade routes, often changing form and meaning as they passed from one language to another. The English word silk itself derives from the Greek serikos, which came from the Chinese sai. Similarly, the word tea entered European languages through two different routes. The northern overland route gave us the Russian chai and similar forms, while the southern maritime route gave us tea from the Min Chinese pronunciation. More subtly, the Silk Road influenced the grammatical and syntactic development of languages along its routes. The need for merchants from different cultures to communicate led to the development of simplified trade languages and pidgins, some of which evolved into creoles spoken by permanent communities. These linguistic innovations often influenced the grammatical development of the major languages spoken in trading centers, creating the complex multilingual environments that characterized Silk Road cities. The impact on personal names was equally significant. The cosmopolitan nature of Silk Road communities led to the adoption of names from multiple cultural traditions within single families. A Persian merchant family might give their children Chinese, Arabic, and Persian names, reflecting both the international nature of their business and their desire to help their children succeed in different cultural contexts. Marriage customs adapted similarly, with wedding ceremonies often incorporating elements from multiple religious and cultural traditions to accommodate the diverse backgrounds of Silk Road families. The architectural legacy of the Silk Road is visible today in the distinctive building styles that emerged in major trading centers. These architectural traditions combined structural techniques from different cultures with decorative elements that reflected the international nature of Silk Road communities. The Great Mosque of Isfahan, for example, incorporates Persian architectural principles with decorative elements derived from Chinese, Central Asian, and Arab traditions. The result is a building that is distinctly Persian, yet unmistakably international in character. The domestic architecture of Silk Road cities was equally distinctive. Wealthy merchant houses were designed to accommodate the complex social needs of international families. These houses typically included separate quarters for wives from different cultural backgrounds, guest facilities for merchants from various countries, secure storage areas for valuable goods, and workshops where family members could engage in craft production during the off-season. The urban planning of Silk Road cities reflected their commercial functions. The great bazaars were typically located at the geographical center of the city, with different quarters radiating outward based on ethnicity, religion, or trade specialization. The Chinese quarter might be located near the East Gate, convenient for caravans arriving from China, while the Persian quarter might be near the West Gate. Religious buildings, mosques, Buddhist temples, Christian churches, and Zoroastrian fire temples were distributed throughout the city, often within walking distance of the residential quarters of their respective communities. The legal systems that governed these multicultural cities were remarkably sophisticated. Most major Silk Road cities developed parallel legal systems that allowed different communities to govern their internal affairs according to their own traditions, while providing neutral mechanisms for resolving disputes between members of different communities. A typical case might involve a Chinese merchant, a Persian banker, and a Central Asian guide, each operating under different legal traditions but needing to resolve a commercial dispute. The legal systems that evolved to handle such situations were among the most advanced in the pre-modern world. The preservation of historical documents in the dry climates of Central Asia has given modern historians unprecedented insight into these legal systems. Thousands of contracts, court decisions, and legal commentaries have been discovered in sites like Dunhuang and Turfan, revealing the day-to-day operation of Silk Road legal systems. These documents show that legal principles we associate with modern international law, concepts like diplomatic immunity, standardized commercial contracts, and neutral arbitration, were well-developed features of Silk Road civilization. The role of women in Silk Road legal systems was more complex and varied than in most contemporary societies. While women were generally excluded from long-distance travel for safety reasons, they often played crucial roles in managing family businesses and property. Legal documents from Central Asian cities show women owning property independently, entering into commercial contracts, and even serving as arbitrators in commercial disputes. Some of the wealthiest individuals in Silk Road cities were women who had inherited family trading businesses and expanded them through careful management and strategic marriages. The cultural memory of the Silk Road persisted long after the trade routes themselves fell into disuse. The epic literature of Central Asia, Persia, and China is filled with references to the great trading expeditions of earlier eras. These literary works, composed centuries after the Silk Road's decline, helped preserve knowledge of the routes and trading practices for future generations of scholars and explorers. The 19th and 20th century rediscovery of the Silk Road was driven partly by these literary references. European explorers like Aurel Stein and Sven Hedin used medieval Persian and Chinese texts as guides to locate forgotten cities and trade routes. Their archaeological discoveries, in turn, confirmed many of the details preserved in literary sources, demonstrating the accuracy of cultural memory across centuries of neglect. Modern genetic research has revealed another dimension of Silk Road legacy: the biological traces left by centuries of population movement and intermarriage along the trade routes. DNA analysis of modern populations across Eurasia shows clear evidence of the genetic mixing that occurred in Silk Road communities. Populations in Central Asia, in particular, show genetic markers from East Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, reflecting the cosmopolitan nature of their ancestors. This genetic evidence provides scientific confirmation for historical accounts of the international character of Silk Road communities. The genetic diversity of modern Central Asian populations mirrors the cultural and linguistic diversity that historical sources describe in medieval trading cities. It also reveals previously unknown patterns of population movement, suggesting that the scale of human migration along Silk Road routes was even greater than historical records indicate. The agricultural legacy of the Silk Road is equally significant. Many of the crops that define regional cuisines across Eurasia were originally spread by Silk Road trade. Grapes, which now seem quintessentially European, were originally Central Asian crops that spread both east and west along the trade routes. Similarly, soybeans, now associated primarily with East Asian cuisine, were originally Chinese crops that spread westward to become important protein sources in Central Asian and Middle Eastern diets. The techniques for processing and preserving these crops also spread along the trade routes. Chinese methods for fermenting soybeans influenced the development of similar fermentation techniques in Central Asia and the Middle East. Persian techniques for drying and preserving fruits were adopted by Chinese communities along the Silk Road and eventually spread throughout China. These agricultural exchanges were as important as the trade in luxury goods for the development of regional food cultures. In studying the Silk Road, we study nothing less than the history of human civilization itself, in all its complexity, creativity, and interconnectedness. The merchants who carried silk from China to Rome could never have imagined that they were participating in one of history's greatest experiments in globalization. But their courage, enterprise, and vision created a legacy that continues to shape our world today. From the spices in our kitchens to the mathematical concepts we use, from the architectural traditions we admire to the legal principles that govern international commerce, the influence of the Silk Road permeates every aspect of modern life. The road they traveled may have fallen into disuse, but the connections they forged between East and West, the traditions of exchange and cooperation they established, and the model they provided for peaceful interaction between different cultures remain as relevant today as they were 2,000 years ago. In our contemporary globalized world, facing challenges of cultural understanding, economic cooperation, and sustainable development, the Silk Road offers both inspiration and practical lessons about the possibilities and perils of international exchange. Perhaps most importantly, the Silk Road demonstrates that human civilization has always been global in scope, connected by bonds of trade, culture, and shared curiosity about the world beyond our immediate experience. The merchants, scholars, artists, and adventurers who created this remarkable network of exchange remind us that the desire to connect across cultural boundaries, to learn from other traditions, and to benefit from peaceful commerce is among the most fundamental and enduring of human impulses. Their legacy challenges us to build bridges rather than walls, to seek understanding rather than dominance, and to remember that our common humanity transcends the artificial boundaries that too often divide us.